looking like it may be one of our very last.
Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another amazing show on Nightlight Radio. In all the years that I've been doing this show, I've had the honor of interviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of authors, and all of them are special, all of them are unique, and I've learned from all of them. But every now and then, there's an author that not only touches my spirit, but my soul. And I have one of those authors here with me today. I've read a lot of his books, more than I think I can count actually on one hand. Well, on two hands actually. And his books always have touched me so deeply that they have been gifts that I've given others, and that they are gifts that I feel that humanity really needs to pay attention to. In all the years that I've done this, it's a rare occasion that I sit down and I say to you, this is a book, or these are books that you need to read because it will change your perception on your reality, on how you teach each other. It will change your philosophy on the trajectory that humanity is on at this particular point in time. They're books that in some ways can be a little upsetting because it tells you what has happened to humanity and what humanity has done to humanity. And it's important for you to understand what has happened so that it never, ever, ever happens again. I have with me today is Charlie Pelligrino, and he is a New York Times bestselling author of Her Name Titanic and The Ghost of Titanic, and also To Hell and Back, The Last Train from Hiroshima. Now, these books are amazing, and it's the Hiroshima book that changed my life forever. He has done amazing things with his work, and I don't really think that he understands how deeply his work does touch people. But the last book that we did was To Hell and Back, The Last Train with Hiroshima, and his book that we're going to be talking about today, which of course is Ghosts of Hiroshima. And it's a deeper dive into what happened. And the book it's just amazing. Along with, his other books, he was also the technical advisor to James Cameron on Titanic and Avatar, and the recipient of the Isaac Asimov Memorial Award for Science Writing. This book is one that you've got to read, but I want you to read both of them if you can. This one, Ghosts of Hiroshima, is based on years of forensic archaeology combined with interviews of more than 200 survivors of their families. This is 200 people that lived through both bombs. Ghost of Hiroshima is a you are there account of ordinary human beings thrust into extraordinary events during which our modern civilization entered its most challenging phase, a nuclear adolescent that, unless we are very wise and learned from our part, we may not survive. And I think that his books actually, among other things, remind you that it's, we casually have said, well, we'll just drop the bomb on them. Read these books. Read what they did and what they are doing to us and our culture, and pay close attention, because it is necessary for us to really be able to mature enough to not use these weapons ever again. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Hi, hello.
I am so delighted that you could come and talk to me about this book, because it touched my heart so deeply. And I really would like you to sort of explain to people why it was so important for you to write not only this one, but the prior one.
Uh, a lot of people, especially after 9/11, for example, walking the streets of New York, you would hear people saying, oh, nuke this one, nuke that one. And the word still, the expression still comes too easily off of people's tongues. And I had already been researching what the atomic bombs did, going all the way back to high school when I was about 17 years old. And I had a friend whose father was in the FBI who he seemed, it was kind of said, oh, he worked in accounting or something, but he knew a lot about explosions of all kinds. And whenever there was a terrorist attack, he'd be going away somewhere. So he was the one who first introduced me to a Hiroshima survivor, who started telling me about things like people who had survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and gone on to Nagasaki. He saw that I had a fear and an interest in this subject and kind of encouraged that for me to go find out. The first survivor I met was a man who was giving a talk that my friend's father brought me along to that. And that was the doctor whose glasses were knocked off of his face during the first detonation in Hiroshima. And he saw his glasses on the floor amid all this rubble, unbroken, and picked them up. And suddenly he could not see, took his glasses off. He could look around, everything was clear, put them on, couldn't see, and said to me, I don't think anyone ever topped that kind of understatement that I've heard in my whole life. He said, of course, I would not recommend nuclear explosions for corrective eye surgery.
No.
So, but that was kind of the start of it. I was learning more. I had more of a fear of nuclear weapons than most of my friends in school when we were doing these duck and cover drills and out in the hallway of the school ducking down. And we're right outside of New York City. And they had built a new wing to the school with what was one of the East Coast largest fallout shelters. And they showed us that school fallout shelter. And what are they expecting if we survive this, we would come up to? And as the years went on, I got more and more involved in, it was almost like a Dr. Strangelove thing, how I learned to stop worrying and dive into nuclear power. And with brainstorming sessions out at Brookhaven Labs, well, can we do antimatter triggered fusion for nuclear propulsion in space? And how high up can we get a Valkyrie rocket to go? And in the 80s, there was also a program, brainstorming sessions out at Brookhaven, about, well, the Star Wars program is on. That was Ronald Reagan's Space Defense Initiative. And gee, with these lasers that are being developed, if they're not used as weapons, nuclear warfare submarine, if it's not used as a weapon, you can't use it for anything else. But laser devices, we can use those to propel laser sails out of the solar system, even. And the particle bed reactor, which was going to be needed, was something that, wow, we could cluster a few of these together if they continue to develop, and we can put Mars only a few weeks away instead of 6 months to 9 months away. So it was a matter of, wow, more and more that's the kind of thing I was doing. But also along the way, I had every opportunity interviewing survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And my life has been rather strange to the point, I
Yes.
survived. I wasn't built to live much beyond the age of 15. Some medical technology started catching up with me. It's amazing to me that I'm still here. And so I had, survived cancer at 15, had a tongue twister of a disease called ankylosing spondylitis. The kid that I grew up with at the 4-H clubs, Jesse Stoff, we wrote Darwin's Universe together. And then he left primordial biology into medicine. He was studying over in England and Germany after he got his MD and came back. He said, "No, what's going on to you is very familiar, and they treat it differently there." And he said, "My job is to keep you alive until the biologicals are developed." And he basically was using Chinese medicine, which the royal family uses, on me, and that kept me going pretty well through, you know, and through a lot of other things. I mean, you add on a couple of plane crashes and so on, and my life has been a bit crazier than most people's lives, to the point of in 2005, when I came back from excavations outside of Jerusalem, infected by a new type of penicillin that seemed to do something quite unusual in a good way. And I came back and I'm with the family for, a whole day into the next day. And I mentioned, yeah, this hurts a little. Well, what happened to your elbows? Oh, it's just a minor bullet wound. So it's like just normal, just a flesh wound from a bit of shrapnel from a bullet after it ricocheted off a steel door near me. And it's like, yeah, that's normal in this family.
Well, I think what touched me. So I grew up in kind of the same place you did, New York, and I can remember being led into the halls and told to duck and cover our heads
Yeah,
and face the wall. And after reading your books, I realized that was totally useless.
yeah, yeah.
And it was like there is no way to avoid damage if you are exposed to a nuclear explosion. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, if a nuclear war started to break out, someone asked me on one interview, well, what would you do? And I said, I'm in New York. Hopefully, the Russians still have the Empire State Building as the aiming point, and I'd finally get up to the top of the Empire State Building and then look around until you want to be right there. You don't want to, you know, 1,000th of a second later, that's it. Your nerves haven't even
Yeah.
begun to transmit pain.
I mean, they were vaporized. And
Yeah.
some of the really overwhelming sights that I got from the first book was that people were noticing on the street that there were lots of pebbles, and the pebbles were really not pebbles; they were teeth. They were the last thing that would be vaporized. And then when after reading The Last Train from Hiroshima, and then Ghost of Hiroshima came out, I thought, how could he possibly find more? And you did. And what I felt fascinating was that you took some of the characters and you expanded upon their stories, you expanded upon their experiences. And when these people shared their stories with you, it was unusual because people who survived the bombs were more or less shunned because they were afraid that it was catching.
Yeah, the exposed, I mean, marriages in the 50s and 60s were usually arranged through the family and approved through the family. So they survived, but they really weren't allowed to live. You were denied marriage if people knew of it. Kenshi Hirata, who survived both atomic bombs, his family and his wife's family managed to keep the children uh, basically hidden out in the open so that they wouldn't face this prejudice. You would be denied even higher education. Major corporations would not want to hire you, even if you were a second and third generation survivor of the people who were exposed. So, and some people to this day, the families do not want it to be known that they're exposed. There were many examples in jars of fetuses that came out very deformed, and that is what frightened people most. And but what is not was not widely known is that was a matter of if you were exposed to the rays during the first trimester, when cells were most rapidly dividing and when one wrong mutation could just resound through entire organ systems. That's when that happened. If you were exposed and then you married and you had children, almost always those children were born all right. Because another thing is we have, a lot of that DNA that they used to call junk DNA that
Yeah.
doesn't code for protein. It's actually coding for a regulator system of RNA that signals back if there's something gone wrong. And DNA correction and repair systems are absolutely amazing. And I mean, it's amazing when you look at the probability that from single egg to human being that anyone is born normally, and yet it
Yes.
works almost all the time. And the body is resilient even against high doses of radiation. But during the first trimester, things, if you were exposed to the flash and the gamma rays, and in Nagasaki, tremendous amounts of microwaves were given out by the bomb. You were exposed to that then, it was a very big problem. And those are the things that everyone remembers, these horrifying uh, first trimester stillborn children.
Well, for those that did survive the entire solution, both bombs, um, after they survived it, in their DNA, were there mutations that could be passed on, or were their children normal?
Very rarely. The next generation of children were normal. And
So there's
so
there's
it
no carrying
became
through.
a fear that was, and I think also because families of the exposed really did not tell that their children was a second generation Hibakusha, that the truth of it was really not known for a while.
I think that in school, and in periodicals and things like that, we saw some of the results of the bomb, but we
Yeah.
didn't see and we didn't feel the results of the people. And I
Mm.
think that was a mistake, because I think humanity as a whole should have seen the horror of it, because by seeing what the bomb did to people, nobody would want to put anyone through that ever again.
No, it's, I mean, it's people who say, let's nuke this one, let's nuke that one. They have no idea what they are saying. And I hope this gets out there, and I mean, education, there's no substitute. There
Well,
was a
and
film in the 80s, The Day After, and a British one, Threads. And yeah, Threads is even more horrifying because it goes on into the decades after. And the day after is what happens in one town. And even that, as horrifying as it was, kind of understates what a full scale nuclear war would really do.
that's true.
And
I
yet,
did, yeah.
those two films did change President Reagan's way of thinking.
Oh, The Day After was a horrifying film.
Yeah.
I do remember seeing that. I had nightmares. Um, and the fact that what color you wore determined the extent of
Mhm.
the damage that was done you. That fascinated me. Why was it those that had black on were damaged more severely than those who were wearing white?
Yeah. If you, the white reflected the flash. Now, if you were, say, in Hiroshima, a mile and a half, almost 2 miles away, if you were wearing patterned clothing, the dark flower patterns on a woman's dress would actually be branded into her skin. There was a teacher who was hanging into the school window, hanging on the window, the calligraphy that the children in her class had written. And one child had written her name in calligraphy. And at the moment of the flash, and she was not quite 1 mile away, she was hanging this child's piece of paper in the school window. And the black ink immediately absorbed the 1 second. All right. The black ink immediately absorbed the light and disintegrated, but the white paper was still there. But during that first 1/10 of a second, the light was still strong enough from the flash to actually stencil the writing of that child onto the teacher's forehead and part of her face. And in years to come, the teacher just felt that in honoring that child, she would not have it removed or covered up or anything. Uh, Nagasaki was a much more powerful bomb. And there was a prison camp almost 40 miles away. And there was a prison coal mine, and the coal miners who were just coming up from the mine 40 miles away, those with the coal on their skin was burning. And the men next to them saw this happening, saw them flinching and screaming, and there was a puddle nearby, and some of the men, prisoners near them, threw those men right into the puddle. They all lived. But imagine, this is a Model T bomb. It's the first type of nuclear weapon, and 40 miles away, it's doing that. It flash desiccated trees 40 miles away. If that very same bomb would detonated over, say, California during a dry spell, it would have created a hurricane of fire more than 80 miles across, with the hypercane in the center reaching all the way up through the stratosphere.
I know the story of the little boy who had the marbles, and
The
they were
Matsuda
no. I mean,
child.
the story of the children especially, and at that point in time, a lot of children had already been conscribed by the Japanese government
Mm.
to do all sorts of jobs around because there were no more adults could do them. And I think one of the things that was so amazing was how as soon as anyone was able, they were starting to rescue each other because there was nobody, the government didn't send anybody in. They sent people in and they ran.
Right. The governor of Nagasaki ran right back into his shelter. Uh, Amazing thing in both cities. As an example, the teenagers who were running the trolley cars,
Yeah.
they did an impromptu, because many of the tracks were still there. They had a couple of trolley cars that were still able to operate, and they started turning those trolley cars into impromptu ambulances and also crossing people around to find their relatives. The trolley station in Hiroshima became makeshift hospital.
Yeah.
It's
And
uh, it's interesting how in sudden catastrophes that happens so often. The people who are in charge, who are put in office to organize, sometimes they come apart. They don't do too well.
no,
You had Lightoller on the Titanic, for example. He's sending lifeboats out half empty, and
that's true.
actually did things that helped to sink the ship maybe an hour earlier by opening up companionway doorways, opening up loading doors in the bow of a ship that was sinking by the bow. And during the hearing in New York, they said, "Didn't you think that was kind of a bad idea?" I said, "Well, I didn't think the ship could sink."
Yeah.
Oddly, he became one of the heroes of Dunkirk. And if you see the movie Dunkirk, the guy with the boat that goes back and forth doing the rescue, the little cabin cruiser, that was Lightoller. Uh, he
Ah,
grew, he learned. But interestingly, San Francisco earthquake and so on, Titanic, one of the chief Baker became one of the heroes of that night. And these lifeboats were actually, they could be made into sailboats. He had sailing background. He was told, get into that boat, take command of that boat. 3 times he was told to do that. And he said, nope. And he would go down below and bring women and children up. The women were reluctant. He'd snatch their babies and make them run after him to collect their babies. And he and the small group of people he was with, they'd throw the babies in the lifeboats and then throw the chasing mothers in with them. San Francisco earthquake, trolley drivers again. They were the ones who started organizing rescue, and a theater group that actually organized rescue on the spot while the government wasn't helping at all during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
well, I think too, what was fascinating was how the prisoners began to help rescuing as well. I
Yeah,
mean, they didn't turn around and walk away. They were trying to help the people as well, and they were. It was an amazing. There was one Japanese guard that had given the
yeah,
prisoners extra food, and he was one of the ones that not only did he help them after the bomb, but they all supported him when he was brought up on charges that he was, one of those that was compassionate and that did help people.
right. And at great risk to himself, his whole family. The policy back then of the military was one bad apple and you have to wipe out the whole family, maybe the whole village. And he was bringing in food that there were about 125 to 150 prisoners. He saved their lives. He let them damage the coal mining equipment,
Yes.
pretending, the guy who was the head of doing that so that the men could get some rest and not be worked to death. The British prisoner who was doing that, he thought he was pulling the wool over Hayato's eyes, but learned later they became friends forever after that. Learned later that, no, I knew you were doing it, but at great risk to his whole family, he was smuggling in food for these prisoners. And then after the war, they went out and rescued wherever they could.
Well, it was also his wife who was making the
Yes.
food. I mean, she was complacent as well. So his whole family would have been killed.
Yeah. Yeah. Not so much complacent as just they knew of the danger and put themselves in the danger anyway. And that defines a hero.
And in all of this, when you look at it, you've pulled up some of the most touching stories of the man who dug his and looking for his wife's bones and
Oh,
part of her skull, and then slept on top of the ashes, and he was on the last train to Hiroshima to take her ashes back to the family. And when he got there, um, they basically, I don't know if it was before or after Nagasaki bomb, but because he survived them both, but um, his wife's family said, we haven't registered the wedding yet, so you are not married.
right, right.
So it set him free from being able to carry that forward, as far as would that have made it harder for him to marry again?
Uh, no, they wanted him to go forth and have a life. And the other meaning of what was said was that our families are cut off forever. But that was officially what it was. They actually protected him when he remarried, and they watched after his children. And he visited, and he and his second wife, they visited the memorial stone that had been put up for Setsuko and made offerings of water there. Uh, and he visited almost every day. Neither he nor his second wife ever forgot her and never let her be forgotten.
It's amazing. So when you were looking for those that had survived the two, um, at first it must have been very, very hard because of the fact that they didn't want to be remembered as survivors of the bombs.
Right.
What
And one, she kept it to herself until after the first book came out. And there were some weird claims. Kenshi Hirata came forward after the first book came out when you had some journalist, so-called journalist here in the US saying double atomic bomb survivors didn't exist. There was only one, and that was Yamaguchi. And one of the people who was yelling this the loudest, and I mean one day really yelling at me on the phone, she worked for the New York Times, and her own newspaper in 1955, 56 said reported on 9 who survived both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so Kenshi came out of hiding because of that. And then we had the whole rest of his story. Much history would have been lost if not for that, including another double survivor who came forth, Kinyuyo, and the story of her brother. And I had part of the story. And then last June, I visited with her in Japan, and the rest of the story came out. So that'll be in the paperback. She's in this book, but she was one of the first responders. She was a 15-year-old nurse. So I've always had, we're a 9/11 family. I've always had a very warm spot in my heart for first responders. And we've had a couple firefighters in the family and so on, police. And so there's always, when I learned that she was a first responder, I had to meet her finally face to face. And at first, she was, no, no, no. You say I'm a hero. I'm not a hero. Don't call me a hero. But she was. She and her brother had a very interesting relationship. I mean, they are really now a main part of the story. If you've ever seen the movie Grave of the Fireflies, it's a Japanese animation about the firebombing of Osaka and these two children. And it's one of I put it up in the top 10 of the most powerful anti-war movies ever made that not many people have ever heard of. Flowers of War is another. Um, but they are sort of like the Grave of the Fireflies story, only it's both atomic bombs. These children survived both atomic bombings.
Well, and with the first book, I was horrified, and so I was ready with the second book as to what it could have happened. And in the second book, you go more and more into the people's stories themselves, and the one about Omayari,
Mm,
a term and a word that everybody should understand. Everybody should know what Omayari is, and how we should all live it. It's probably one of the most beautiful stories, and the word itself is so beautiful that it should be taught in school and church. It should be taught in both
yeah.
places.
And it's you know it has several meanings. Think of the other person first. Uh, it's also basically what translates in America to the pay it forward principle, that
Yeah.
acts of human tenderness, acts of human kindness, that it can spread out into the world. And the hope of Sadako's family is that this principle will go out into the world, maybe prevent something terrible from happening that we won't even know it prevented it. The It's been a word brought down to my family, meaning a lot. I'm proudest of our three kids that they've grown up taking that principle to heart. They've all gone into medicine, social work, things of that sort to help others, and gone into that really for the right reasons and directly through the principle of Omayari.
Well, tell the story of the cranes and her,
Yeah.
because it's a beautiful story.
Sadako, at the time when she was 11 years old, she was actually an Olympic hopeful by her teacher in the track team. And she started to get ill. It was, there were whole hospital wards filling up 10 years after with children with leukemia. Leukemia in Japan became known at that time as atomic bomb disease. And one day, some people visited the hospital and they were folding these paper cranes. And she picked up on that. And she started eventually folding these paper cranes. At first, they started out about the size of sparrows, but colored paper was a little scarce and expensive, so she started making them smaller and smaller. And she had heard that 1,000 paper cranes, you will get you a wish. If you can fold 1,000 paper cranes, you will get your wish for better health, for healing from this disease. Well, she completed her 1,000 paper cranes and just kept on going. And actually, her main wish was that for her father to be out of debt. He had tried to help a neighbor who was in debt as Hiroshima is beginning to rebuild, and something happened to that man, and he had to carry the debt because he had co-signed. And she was praying at times as she became more ill, more for her father than even for herself, and more for others. And more of her prayer went into each of these paper cranes because the scarcity of paper, at first she's okay, I'll make the cranes smaller. And then she realized it was much more difficult to make a smaller paper crane. They were soon down to the size of bumblebees, then honeybees. And eventually she was folding them with sewing needles until they were down smaller than rice grains. And those were the last ones she made. She went on to make about 1,600 of them. And she shared the word Omayari with her brother, who, by the way, is still alive. And, and so this became a shared word between them. And then the princess, so she had said more, because they were so much harder to make, the smaller they went, more of her spirit and her prayer went into each one. And I started hearing about it when I was working forensic archaeology in the ruins of the World Trade Center and around St. Paul's Chapel. And on the doors of this one firehouse, bundles of 1,000 paper cranes started arriving. And uh, in that gray landscape, they were the only splashes of color in September and October into December of 2001. And one of the firefighters had asked, "What is it about these paper cranes?" I said, "Well, there's a book my children are telling me about." And it was Eleanor Kerr's book, Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes. It has something to do with Hiroshima. And in fact, on one of the paper crane bundles in the family room, the 9/11 family room, there was a strip and calligraphy, and it translated to "Come back to Hiroshima." And that was from the family of a man who's in the first book, and he lost his brother in Hiroshima, and he lost his son on 9/11. And so that was the beginning of the connection between the family room and Hiroshima families. And I obeyed what the strip said, come back to Hiroshima. And I brought a couple of those paper cranes from that bundle. My children replaced them, and I brought them back to the father when I visited Hiroshima. And I also brought one to Sadako's brother when I visited in 2009.
Didn't some of the survivors come to meet with the family members of some of the people that had passed over on 9/11?
Yes, there's been a very deep connection between us. In fact, I was, I'm a scientist, not a journalist. So, as a journalist, you're not supposed to get involved. And some of these families have become our extended family, and we've become their extended family. And there's a deep connection between, at first, I thought calling this place Ground Zero was disrespect to the other two ground zeros. But Sadako's brother, when I met him one day in the family room, he said, "This is another place where people must never die this way again." And so it's like, okay, if he's okay with calling them it that, I guess I can. I still have some reluctance. You don't often hear me calling it Ground Zero. More often I'll say like the World Trade Center ruins, or know, at the time I called it the crater. Uh, but there is quite a connection. And even now it's extended to Fukushima, where they made a large paper crane out of
Yes.
World Trade Center steel. And one of the people who brought it over to Japan, to Fukushima, is actually the grandson of Jacob Beser, who was the radar man who was basically in control of the radar prompted detonation system. And he flew both missions at that post on the atomic strike plane. So, there's all these connections between the families now. Ari Bezier, who brought the steel paper crane to Fukushima, he's very close friends with President Truman's grandson.
Wow.
So these connections have formed and continue to develop. Kinyo, who I mentioned before, who survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the family had sent her and her brother away from the fishing village where they were living because they were known to have been exposed twice, and where they could begin their lives without that kind of scrutiny and actually live their lives. And one of the last things in her little brother's diary about what happened and what they experienced, he wrote in there as when they got on the boat, and he's describing leaving the fishing village, and he said, "I don't want to go to Fukushima." And
I,
yeah,
yeah,
they were in all three places.
I think also there was, you also go into a prisoner of war who kept getting, he was in situations where you thought he couldn't possibly live, and he lived. And
Oh, Fuchida, that his story is absolutely amazing. And then his family became related to
yeah,
yeah, oh boy, to a family that was where my friend Tack, he was born in the Japanese internment camp, the Tool Lake camp in California. And another thing not many people know, at that camp, many people were, after the war, stripped of their American citizenship and deported to Japan. And his
yeah,
family ended up, that's where he got his exposure to radiation, by eating the food that they had to grow on Grand that still had some long-lived radioactive isotopes in it. And there were some of his siblings developed cancer at a young age. But when he ended up in real estate in New York, he was working with the son of the guy who brought the scientists into Hiroshima, had survived all sorts of things, including he was the man who called out Tora, Tora, Tora when leading the raid on Pearl Harbor. Now, Tack Furumoto, when he started working in real estate, which was what he was doing to get past, he his family made their way back to America, and these deported people, Tack is very patriotic. He volunteered and became an officer, and was exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, came back, PTSD. His wife said, "Okay, you should start your own business and work alone while you're getting through all this stress." So he went into real estate, and at one point, his business partners, Joseph Fuchida, the son of this guy in the 1980s, the guy who led the raid on Pearl Harbor. Now, in the 1980s, there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment because their cars were outselling ours,
yeah.
because we were building 4-year self-destruct Fords. And so there was that anti-Japanese sentiment, just as Tack is going into business with a new guy selling some properties, Donald Trump. And it's like to Joseph, don't let Donald Trump know that your father led the raid on Pearl Harbor. Don't let him know who you are. There is enough PTSD in the world already. But I mean, the strange interconnections between all these people, I, as one after the other came up. Oh yeah, you knew him, and you expect that on a small location like the Titanic,
Yeah.
that you would find people who were interconnected, but I didn't run into it all that often. Uh, you hear the interconnections were just, if you saw the TV series Lost, where that was one of the underlying themes, or if you have read The Bridge of San Luis Rey,
Yep.
this Hiroshima and Nagasaki are that for real. And I don't know how to explain. It's
Well,
against all probability curves, these amazing coincidences.
well, and I think, we heard about the camps, but assumed it was, just, a camp, and they were,
Mm.
but they were awful. They were almost like
Yeah.
concentration camps. They were,
And occasionally people were shot
yeah,
in the Japanese internment camps. And it was one of those times where it was decided, well, we're going to suspend the US Constitution. And TAC will be the first person to tell you, that the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, it is like a great river, like the Colorado River, and it has to be protected and defended every inch of its course.
I
It
think
is a beautiful document.
you also, though, went into the men who were part of the crew that dropped the two bombs, and how they were their training was in different places so that you couldn't connect everything, and I was not aware that each of the bombs had an electronic trigger that if radar had hit them, it would have exploded the plane in midair.
Right, and Jacob Beser was in charge of monitoring that and making sure that if someone was pinging the plane and from too close in the right direction, that they'd avoid that.
Well, that and
Jacob
also,
Bezier, he was in that position because on the initial IQ test to go into the military, they just flagged him, and then they ended up putting him on the Manhattan Project.
well, I think what got me was that he was told, never mind, you're going to be here and you're going to be there, and
Yeah,
but the crews of the planes, they were there enough to witness the ground boiling,
yeah.
which it was horrifying. And I wasn't aware that there were planes that were photographing everything that were along with those planes. I thought they were alone, but they weren't.
Yeah, and dropping scientific instruments. So Luis Alvarez, who was someone I worked with when I was in New Zealand, him and his son, on the nuclear winter, what became the nuclear winter theory, the asteroid and the dinosaur and all that. One of the main layers of it was in New Zealand. Walter Alvarez was digging a few meters down below me. And, so we're back and forth on the nuclear winter, but Luis Alvarez's son had told me, do not ask him anything about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I never did. He was on the plane that dropped he designed and dropped the monitoring equipment that monitored the pressure wave, the blast wave, various types of radiation, and so on. It was monitoring for almost everything except microwaves, which is the horrible thing about Nagasaki. And the evidence for that we have from survivor accounts that there was from the plutonium bomb. It might have been a combination of a slight difference in the type of in the reaction itself, but also that it was a much more powerful surge. It unleashed a surge of microwaves. So people who were carrying their lunch pails to work, the metal handle burned the inner part of the hand, intercepting the microwaves. There was a large Catholic community around Urakami, which was the town where the hypocenter of the bomb was. Nagasaki was not directly hit. The bomb missed by a couple of miles, went off over Urakami, and around that area you had a lot of Catholics. It was one of the largest Catholic communities in the East, which was why General MacArthur really wanted Nagasaki to be the forgotten bomb. But if you were wearing a chain with a crucifix, the microwaves were intercepted by that and actually branded the chain and the cross into your skin. So people receive deadly doses of microwaves, and some of them actually survived it.
Well, when I was teaching, one of the principal of the school, he and his family had been in one of the internment camps, and the assistant principal had been at the first explosion in one of the ditches, and he had to go every 6 months for a checkup to make sure that he didn't have radiation poisoning or cancer or anything like that. And he said to us that the light was so bright that he could see the bones in his hands.
Yeah. Several people immediately put their hands to their faces, and with their eyes closed, they could see the bones of their hands. Yamaguchi, he's about a mile and a half away, and he dove to the ground. He was one of the double survivors from Hiroshima. He dove to the ground, covered his ears and his face was in the ground, and he could still see the light shining through his skull.
Oh, wow. It's just something that you read this book and you realize, horrors of war. I didn't realize that Nagasaki was really not one of the targets. It was a backup target, and that
Yeah,
the plane was running out of gas, and they basically, I think the initial target, whatever it was cloudy, and so they went to Nagasaki, and there was just a break in the clouds, and they dropped the bomb, and they got out of there.
yeah. There was a break at the last minute, but it was decided they were going to use the radar imaging equipment they had and drop it anyway. And on the radar, they were able to see this oval shaped race track or track field. And so they were able to see that, and they knew they were near Nagasaki. Charles Sweeney knew they were a little bit off target, but he figured that if it goes off in that valley, the valley itself would act like the barrel of a shotgun, and the Mitsubishi submarine bases and torpedo plants and everything would be taken out by this lateral blast. Sweeney was almost court-martialed. Paul Tibbets of the Enola Gay mission, he wanted Sweeney court-martialed because Sweeney flew 3 times back and forth over a heavily defended target that they couldn't see through the ground cover.
Yeah.
And the rules were you have to see through the cloud cover before you drop the bomb. And Sweeney, the first target was a purely military base. Sweeney knew the targets, as he said, like the back of his hand. And he was concerned about in Nagasaki, he knew here's a school for the deaf, here's a school for the blind. There are all these children's schools, hospitals, nursing schools. And he had decided he was going to give everything he could to hitting the defended military target. And he tried 3 times, he couldn't, each time putting the plane at risk. There were flak bursts going off around them. Went to Nagasaki, now there was cloud cover, and it was, are we really going to try ditching in the sea with the bomb in the bomb bay? We only have fuel for one pass. We need to do what we should have done with the cloud cover at Kokura, and they released the bomb. Now, on the Hiroshima mission, there's interesting first words. My God, what have we done? And Jacob Beser had his headphones on with the cockpit of the plane, and that was Robert Lewis who said that. But what he initially said when he saw the cloud rising over 50,000 feet overhead, when he saw the boiling on the ground, he said, at first, watching it go up, he said, my God, look at that son of a bitch go. And then moments later, when he looked down and he saw the boiling, that's when he wrote in the mission log, my God, what have we done? And he became one of the people who, with Norman Cousins, was working with and even donating his own money to getting burn victims to the United States, to Mount Sinai Hospital for plastic surgery years later, for
Didn't
reconstructive surgery.
didn't Albert Einstein and one of the other scientists write a letter to urge to not use the bomb?
That was Szilard. Einstein, afterward, he said, I should have just stayed in what I was doing, designing refrigerators with no
Yeah,
moving
he
parts
did.
and
He did.
designing new kinds of watches. Uh, Szilard had wanted the bomb to be tested on an island or something to demonstrate it to the Japanese. And when he heard about the doctor in Nagasaki who was just the right distance within his hospital, not to receive a lethal dose of radiation, but to be dosed this cancer where he was a terminally ill patient in his own hospital, Dr. Nagai, he went into remission and was able to, his energy was coming back and he was able to go out and send out crews and go out rescuing people. And for months he did that. And then he built the Noyakoto Hermitage and he lived for years longer and wrote books and, you know, has set up a scientific research station monitoring what was happening to the plants and the animals and everything around around Urakami.
I think one of the most impressive things was that the survivors that did come in and meet with the families of the those that had passed. Their main message is, you know, the only way to make for a better world is through love. It's not through hate.
Yeah,
It's through
yeah,
love. And I think that to me, again, Oregon Gandhi or Ormogari.
Omalaren. Yeah,
Thank you. Um, it it talks of consideration and peace and love.
yeah,
Um, and I think that so many people don't understand that if they can come out of something like that with the kind of injuries and what they've been through, which is just it's just awful, and say, you know, we have, it's love. If we don't have
mm,
love, humanity won't survive.
yeah. And some of the kindest people I have ever met are people who have come through horrible, horrible things, even in my own family. I mean, we cousins know some of the things our parents went through on my mother's side, and it was just, we ended up out of a horrible background, the kinds of parents we would have chosen if we could have chosen them before we were born. And it's the same with a lot of these survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those who have lived on to older age. Uh, One, they don't sweat the small stuff, and they really have, a majority of them devoted their lives to that principle and to helping others and just being better human beings and hoping that that can spread out into the world.
Well,
One other thing, we were talking about Dr. Szilard. When he knew what happened to Dr. Nagai, that's when he began developing radiation therapy and became his own guinea pig for it when he developed cancer.
well, you know, when you look at all of this and you understand that these people went through horrors that we just can't even conceive
Yeah,
of, that they're turning around saying, love is what we need. We can't ever put anybody through something like this again.
mm,
Um, they there's such a message here in your book that people should read it and understand that we did that to ourselves.
yeah. That's one of the ways I look at it. It's like, you know, drop the bomb on Japan, and people argue whether or not it should have been done, and it's a human thing. I've always said, once upon a time, there existed only 3 atomic bombs in the whole world. We tested one to make sure the machine would work. we drop the other two on ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, when you stop and think about people's concept of the United States and what we're supposedly founded on and everything, that we are the ones that are the only ones to this point in time that have ever used a weapon of mass destruction like that. And I just so highly recommend people get both your books because they, you know, they don't repeat the same story, but they expand upon it. So, and it doesn't matter which way you read them in. I do the last train first and then the new one, but it's important that we understand what went on because sooner or later everybody is going to have passed, and it's very much like what's happening here in Tennessee. In some of the schools, they're teaching that the Holocaust never happened.
They're actually denying it or just not talking about it?
Actually denying it. So
That's
if
part of the curriculum?
yes,
No.
well, a friend of mine's grandson has a teacher that denies it happened, even though he
And
says
no
that it's
one's doing anything about that?
not that I know about. So if that happens with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then that just means it can happen again.
Yeah. A friend of mine had said, oh, can't believe that happened. That's impossible. It couldn't have happened. And then when you get to the point where someone says it didn't happen, he said, that's when it happens again.
Yeah. And that's actually what I fear. I mean, I've read the books, I've done the research. I know it happened. But I'm an older generation. And when it comes to my grandchildren, who I gave the book to, um, and then their children, are they going to remember? Are they going to know? Will there be any symbols of it left? It's sort of like the Great Pyramid. Nobody knows what it's for. It just happens to be there. And it could be a war memorial for all we know. But it's sort of like we can't let it happen again.
Mm.
But
And it may be just a pipe dream, but I hope we get back to nuclear arms reduction and not this new era of escalation.
I would
And that
hope so
we can
too.
really get back there because, if you have 50,000 nuclear weapons in the world, and once we had more than that and we got it back down, if the probability is 1 in 100,000 chance that one of them is going to go off within, there's going to be some clumsy event or some terrorist event or something where one of these is taken and detonated somehow in the next 20 years, and you have 50,000 of them, it becomes a pretty high probability of it happening in that 10 years. If you have 100,000, and we once had over 60,000, if we get back to 100,000, well, then it's, or even 60,000 again, it becomes more like during the
Well,
lifetime of that bomb, any individual bomb going off. If you have enough of them, it becomes a mathematical certainty that it will happen. And when that happens, it can trigger a full-scale nuclear war.
look what happened in was it Hawaii where a
Mm,
warning went out that there was an attack or there was something coming and it terrified the whole country and it was a mistake. Somebody threw a switch by accident.
yeah. Well, there have been worse things than that. I mean, we almost bombed North Carolina by accident years and years ago, but the bomb malfunctioned. Or its safety measures did what they were supposed to do, although some of those safety measures failed on the way down. We were very lucky there. the day we bombed North Carolina. There, in more recent times, there were 3 warheads that were just sitting out in the rain for about a week at one of our bases until someone said, "Are those what I think they are?" Holy, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, you have enough of them, things like that can be happening every month or so. If
And
you
then
really, so yeah,
and
you
then
have to decrease the
overreaction.
number to push
Yeah,
down the probability curve, and hopefully one day we get to a place where there are none.
that would be so nice.
That's not likely, but
That's the goal. I think if enough of us focus on it, we might make it happen.
yeah, otherwise we wait around for Colossus or Skynet to become self-aware if we're stupid enough to do that.
Well, I've often said that fiction, as far as movies and books and television shows, are just a precursor to what's coming. Look at what Star
Mm,
Trek did in
yeah,
their doors opening and shutting for them, and we go in and out of grocery stores with that happening like it was nothing. But on the spaceship, it was brand new technology,
yeah,
and the flip phones and
right.
the tricorders and all
Medical
of those
monitoring behind the people.
all
Yeah.
happened. But we've also seen that in the past with the Titanic, because
Mm,
that book that came out ahead of the Titanic that told the story of the
right.
Titanic, and there was a copy of that book on the Titanic, which I thought was,
Yeah, his publisher at one point was Henry Sleeper Harper, who probably not coincidentally was one of the first people into the lifeboat on the starboard side. Got
wow,
in, he even got away with his dog in the lifeboat.
was a little
Said, "Oh,
dog.
I've read this story before," you know.
I'm out of
And
here. Yeah.
also, that same author wrote about a global world war and nuclear weapons being used. And yeah, and in fact, he wrote that, I think, ahead of H.G. Wells' The World Set Free.
Didn't somebody say if you can think it, you can make it?
Yeah. Robertson was a bit strange, though. I mean, his war begins with the bombing of Hawaii and Manila by uh, from the air and from submarines by Japan. And that was his series of stories, the Beyond the Spectrum War. And
Wow.
yeah, and this was at a time when airplanes were basically not much further beyond the Wright brothers plane. They were spit and glue kites with motors. And he had all that going on, and ships smoldering and their crews blinded and burned by invisible radiation, he called it.
Well,
So,
we've we've certainly managed to take every invention out there and turn it into a weapon, which is probably not the smart way to go.
mm,
But hopefully your books will absolutely help people to realize what we've done, what we're capable of, and what should never happen again. I just noticed our time. We are
oh,
out of it, but
okay. And the great thing is, we have the technology to do wonderful things. I mean, we can
oh,
provide a high standard of living for 9 billion people in the year, the 100th anniversary, 2045. So we can do that, but we have to be wise and we have to pay attention.
fingers crossed. And I want to send people also to Amazon to look at your books, because yeah, there are some favorites there. I mean, I love Dust was a great book. Um, your 3 that you wrote as a pseudonym, loved those. I mean, you are definitely a big part of my library and will continue to be. And
Thank you.
hopefully after the movie comes out, I think we have to have you back again to talk about it.
Okay, will do.
Thanks so very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay.